Hey everyone, how's it going? I got a video for you today. I think I'm just going to riff on this. It's just a topic that I was thinking about. I was watching a video by another YouTuber. I'm not going to name who he was because I don't really want to inadvertently like throw shade or start any fights or anything. I just wanted to kind of continue the discussion. Basically, he was, I guess he's a YouTuber and he's got like an eBay store, and he was kind of going through his eBay store and pointing out how he has all these cards that are like 5 or 6 years old that have like printings of serialized printings of like one of 300, one of 250, whatever, and they're only selling, they're marked like $10 and they're not selling, and they're not generating interest. And he was going through other completed listings of similar cards, and most of them were selling for $1 or $2. And he said that he was kind of trying to make the argument that those cards are all super undervalued because they are exceedingly rare. And then he was comparing them to some of the most iconic cards in history. He chose 2 cards in particular. He took the Jordan rookie from '86 Flair, as well as the Ken Griffey Jr. Upper Deck '89. And he was trying to make the argument that there's 2 million Ken Griffey Juniors printed, and he was looking at pop counts on PSA and saying, like, I forgot what the numbers were, but there's a gajillion, PSA 9s, PSA 8s, etc. Yet people are still PSA 10s, whatever. They're still commanding all of these huge prices for these, and people are just dumb. Is kind of his argument, and he was trying to say that everybody's dumb and they're not understanding why his cards, the cheapies, are going for $1 when they've only got like 300 in existence. And I think what the difference is that this gentleman didn't quite understand is the difference between 2 types of collectability or things. I guess the difference between manufactured scarcity versus organic collectability. So basically, organic collectability is something that people collect because there's something inherent about it that makes people want to collect it. It's based on nostalgia. It's based on memory. It's based on the warm fuzzy feelings that you get from like seeing those, based on your childhood, based on whatever. There's something that draws you to that item that makes you want to collect it. You often see that with like a lot of and I'm a vintage person, so I'll point out to vintage cards. I do have some examples here of cards that just, I think if you remember, I was a kid growing up in the 80s, and there was like price guides and stuff everywhere, and there was, there would be pictures of all these vintage cards, and you'd always kind of drool over them and wish one day you could have one, or you'd go to shows and like see these cards and kind of just look at them for years and years, and you'd want them. I mean, some of these famous cards, example would be like a Thurman Munson, not a rookie, but just this card is so iconic that everybody knows it, everybody loves it. You take everybody knows these cards, and everybody wanted them in their collection at one point or another. They're so iconic. They're so part of the hobby that there's something about them that is intrinsic to them that makes you want to own them. The difference between that and manufactured scarcity is that manufactured scarcity is something that it's market driven. It's basically saying this item, you should want it because it's rare, not because there's anything special about it, not because you remember seeing it as a kid, not because you have any other affinity attachment to it other than the fact that it's rare and nobody else has it. So you can get it, and then you can be one of a kind. It could be a showcase piece. And a lot of this really started to get pushed in the 80s. I mean, you started to see a little bit of that when they started labeling everything as like a collector's item or limited edition. Perfect examples of that are stuff like, here's like a Kmart set. I think every kid I know that grew up in the 80s owned this, and it says 25th anniversary collector's edition of these Kmart like cards, which pictured like old historic players of like the 50s and 60s and whatnot. Everybody owned that. It's not worth anything, but they write collectors on it. Or these Flair sets where they write limited edition on the top of every single one of them, and they have exciting starts, sluggers and pitchers, limited edition. So it like appeals to like the collectability. I mean, newer stuff like in the '90s, you had like Stadium Club doing their charter member limited edition. Whenever you sort of when they make this stuff, they make it with the intention of like saying this is a collector's item. Buy it, don't, keep it in good condition. Don't open it. Sit on it for 20 years and it'll be worth something, rather than something that just organically, like, the organic collectability, where it's just something that you want because you had it as a kid. In this 1960, when this mantle came out, like, people weren't collecting to put things in slabs. They weren't collecting to as an investment or to make money off of. People were, everyone always talks about people putting them in the spokes of their bikes, or I had an uncle who like put them in the bottoms of his shoes to make himself taller, so he could go on dates and stuff. But I don't know, just people were not taking care of them. They didn't care if they got bumps and dings. They just kind of collected them, and by virtue of just time and the passage of time and nostalgia, people wanted to own these things, or have wanted to own these things through the decades. And the modern era stuff, where you've got the one of ones, or the out of 300s, I wonder about what's that going to look like in 30 years from now. Are these things just going to be like the Kmart thing, or are they going to be more like the iconic cards that we've seen a million times? And I think in some ways it's probably heading down a trail of being more like the Kmart thing. Even though these things are mass produced, the when you try to create something just to capture collectors, or a collector's market, rather than something that is something that people are going to want, there's always going to be something that comes out that's going to be flashier. Like, they've got newer technology than they did in the 80s to make card. Before, they made things glossy, but then they added holograms to them, and then they added pictures to the backs of the cards, and all sorts of refractors, and whatever autographs on the cards that they're sending, the serialized numbers. There's always something that they can add to it. Who knows what the future will bring? So things are always going to be sparkly and prettier than they were 10 years ago. So what's going to make people come back in 30 years and want these cards? That's kind of the question. And I think that one of the issues with, when you have here's an example of this is a one of a one, Katie Ledecky. She's a swimmer. They're Leaf, it's a Leaf signature series, and if you look up like Leaf signature series, like, they've got a million different one of ones. There's like 40 different Katie Ledecky autographed cards on eBay at this given time. So it's not really rare, but they try to make it look rare by making a one of one, but they make a gajillion parallels to it. So there's so many that, is it rare? Is it scarce? Is it collectible? I don't know. But somebody wants it. I mean, I like it, but I mean, are people going to want that? That being said, also, stuff like modern day players. For example, here's a Riley Green. This is a 2023 Ghost parallel. I love Halloween, and this was like the Halloween ghosty thing. It says rookie. Is this a rookie? Is this something people are going to want? And how many years from now? I don't know. That's the question to look at and discuss. And one of the things that kind of makes me think that people are not going to necessarily want these as much is because when you look at collectability, or the collectibles market in general, whether it's sports cards, whether it's toys, whether it's whatever it is that you were like collecting when you were a kid, generally speaking, people, there's kind of like a bell curve for collectibles, where that corresponds to a person's age. Like, once somebody's, they're a kid, they play with things, they collect things, and then they go through their teenage years, they kind of forget about them, they get caught up in school, significant others, etc. Sometimes have kids in their 20s, but then they start to reach their mid-30s or so, and they have, one, more disposable income, and two, they have something starts brewing in their heads, especially if you're kind of a collector type person to begin with, where you start to get nostalgic. And so when people are in their 30s, that's when like old toys that are 30 years older become more expensive and more valuable. People start collecting them. People start getting back into sports cards. People get into anything they were into when they were as a kid in their early 30s, and that kind of goes through their 50s or so, sometimes longer depending on what it is. But it's oftentimes with collectibles in general, it will go your 30s until your late 50s, and then people start to downsize, and we can talk about that in another video. But generally speaking, people want stuff that they remember from when they were kids, and that kind of drives collectability. It drives in vintage markets and in older markets beyond that modern sort of newer speculative sort of era of collecting. And so my curiosity or my wonder is, the thing that I'm thinking about is, if there's only a one of one, how many people saw that card? How many people are going to have nostalgic for a one of one, or even a 54 of 300? Who's going to be nostalgic for that card? Who had it? Not a lot of people may have owned that card, and so they may not have that nostalgia. So when they hit their mid-30s, they're not necessarily looking at that card. They may look at the player, but not necessarily the card. And so it makes me wonder if and some of the things, if you look at collectibles in general, going back, the stuff that ends up being collectible is the stuff that people never thought was going to be collectible in the first place. The stuff that people threw away, discarded, thought was worthless. So it makes me wonder, and this is, I have no, I wouldn't bet money on this, but I wonder, like, what is not valuable right now in the sports card market? And I'm thinking about the base cards. And hear me out on this for a second. Like, the base cards that are in sets that you get in packs that, everybody kind of opens up the pack looking for like the inserts, and it's all about the inserts and stuff. And then they either throw the base cards in a box, or I've even seen stores like actually throw them out in the dumpsters behind the store because they're considered worthless. But little kids who are buying cards and collecting cards, they still collect the base cards. They know all the rookies on them. I'm wondering if the nostalgia may be generated for some of those base cards that everybody's deeming worthless now. Might be. I don't know. Who knows? And maybe some of the parallels that look exactly like the base cards, but some of these other, like, I don't know, super refractor things with laser beams and whatever that are that are out there in small quantities. I wonder if those are going to still be collectible in the same way. I mean, do they have that nostalgia? There's also just the sheer volume of choices. If you've got a player like I don't know, what was I using? You just grab one of these again, Robin Yount again. This is his only rookie card. When people think about what is his rookie, this is the card they think of. When you're thinking of a player like Riley Green, how many different rookie cards does he have? What is his rookie? Nobody knows. What is going to be valuable? Nobody knows. And how are you going to eventually price these things? And we're also seeing, I mean, we're seeing, it's not like serial cards are brand new either. They've been around since the 90s, and we've seen a lot of, we've got some price history, and there's kind of like if you look at the, 2000s through 2010, 2015-ish, I mean, it's kind of a wasteland there's a few key cards, I will give you that, but that market's pretty cold. I don't know if you'd agree with me on that or not, but I think that there's, it gives you a little bit of insight into, like, what are people wanting, like, with this flashy stuff. Is this stuff disposable? Is this stuff just speculative for, a few years around, when someone's a rookie, just to see, what's his career going to look like, etc. I don't know. It just seems in general like there's like there's not a lot of long-term longevity in these, and I wonder what's that going to do to the hobby as a whole. Are people going to be nostalgic for cards? Is it going to, or is nostalgia going to be something that, or that type of collecting, is that going to be something that goes away in the way of, set collectors, where there's less and less set collectors every single year. Very few, and most of them are, kind of getting up there in years. Most of the younger folks are not doing a lot of set collecting. There are exceptions to everything, but are people who look for organic collectability and kind of just short-term flipping and stuff, is that gonna change? Who knows? I mean, I don't have answers to any of these questions, but I was just thinking about it, and kind of just the difference between, the supply and demand that's generated by organic collectability versus manufactured scarcity. You can have a card that has 2 million copies, like Ken Griffey Sr. or Ken Griffey Jr. 1989 Upper Deck. I mean, you also have to look at like attrition and stuff. So even if there were 2 million, and I don't know what the print number is printed, are there still 2 million in existence? Maybe. And if there are 2 million, how many of those are actually in a collectible condition? How many were just opened by kids? Who knows? And beat up and tossed around. The ultimate number is probably a little bit smaller, but it's a lot. There are a lot out there for people to get if they want that card. But still, there is a demand for it. There's enough people. I mean, if you get into the hobby and you're at a certain age, I think that's if you grew up in the 80s, that's a card you want. But anyway, those are kind of just some thoughts that were tinkering around in my mind, and I was curious what your thoughts are on that. And I will, I guess, catch you on the next one. Take care.